Back into Flash we go, with a bit of a different spin this time around.
Of all the games that people seem to remember fondly from Flash, not many of them were horror games. There were some games that some people may consider disturbing, like Skull Kid, but that game comes off as more edgy than what I would consider actual horror. You might as well say something like Hatred is a horror game. The Flash games people mainly remember would be anything but horror. You got platformers, simulations, tower defense games, odd little experiments that I'm not sure have a genre attached to them, but never horror. Like, don't get it twisted, there were horror games made in Flash, but most of them were pretty bad. But there is one series of Flash games that I have heard about through the grapevine that were genuinely creepy. That series being the Deep Sleep games, a trilogy of titles made by Script Welder, who was also responsible for making the Don't Escape series, also developed in Flash. I've only played the first Don't Escape, and I thought it was a neat twist on the escape room concept, where you're a werewolf and you're trying to protect others by containing yourself inside an escape room that you build yourself. It was a neat experiment with an impressively thick atmosphere, and it seems as though Script Welder tried to take that same eerie vibe and use it to tell a more involved story across the entire Deep Sleep trilogy, as the Don't Escape games are all self-contained scenarios. The concept behind the Deep Sleep games is that the protagonist, who I don't think is ever named, has a nightmare while trying to lucid dream, and that piques their interest in the dream world, as they felt the nightmare they had was far more real than any other they'd had in their life up until that point. So, they dedicate their time to studying lucid dreaming, mostly by continuing to lucid dream. There's more to it than that, but that is the Cliff Notes version of this story, and I will get more into it in this video, and if it wasn't obvious from what I just said, I'm gonna be spoiling this story rotten, so there's your warning. It took me 2 hours to get through all 3 games, and that 2 hours includes me stopping to write notes and going back to get extra footage that I missed the first time around. Realistically, you could beat all 3 games in about 90 minutes, so if this summary has piqued your interest in these games, I would suggest playing them first and then coming back to this video. You can get the entire trilogy for about $5 on Steam. You can play them still for free on Newgrounds, or you can download Flashpoint and play them there, which is how I played them. And because these games are so short, I will be going through all 3 of them in quite a bit of detail. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's get into the Deep Sleep. I'm loving the atmosphere already. Just from this opening title screen, you can tell what kind of game that this is going to be. Script Welder has a very gritty, pixelated art style when it comes to their games. There's constant visual noise like old film grain, but somehow even grimier than that. And that haunting, ghostly voice among the ambient music is the cherry on top of this title screen. I think this sets a really nice precedent for the kind of game that we're about to dive into. The story of the first Deep Sleep game is pretty simple on its face. You find yourself in a dark bedroom and very quickly find out you're in a nightmare through this neat little reveal. After leaving the bedroom, you hear a phone ringing in another room, and upon answering that phone, you hear this message.
Wake up. You have to wake up. You have to wake up. You have to escape. I won't. But I love you.
And that's the goal. Wake up from this dream. Most of the rest of this story is left in optional documents like this note that you've left yourself in the central hub of this game, And this newspaper room that I missed the first time around because the hallway it branches off from was so dark that I straight up didn't see the door to it. These aren't much, but do reveal some interesting lore about this world. There is a danger lurking in this place, and it seems to stop people from waking up, and if they do wake up, they aren't themselves anymore. There's something more dangerous. And whatever this danger is, it's coming for you next. In your efforts to find something to help you wake up, you receive recorded and written messages to wake up from someone else out there. Someone who's seemingly trying to help you, all the while you see something that's stalking you. The turning point of the game coming when you're exploring a hallway and find a pickaxe. The brilliance of this chase scene mostly lies in its gameplay, and we'll get to that later, but story-wise it works as well, because the nature of running away from it means you never get a good look at whatever is chasing you. You only see its luminous white eyes piercing at you through the pitch blackness. It's not long after this that you find out that that phone message was just a pre-recorded tape playing on loop. Whoever was trying to help you isn't here anymore. You're on your own. This leads you to a lighthouse where you're cornered by a horde of these shadowy individuals and need to use the lighthouse in order to dissipate them into nothingness. The protagonist then ponders whether the dream they had was just a dream because it felt too real to them. And this is the only negative I have with this game's narrative. This ending monologue feels like a bit of a leap in logic to me. Nightmares and night terrors can feel very real in the moment, so I don't know why this person thinks that this is anything other than a nightmare cooked up in their own mind. It feels like this is just here to contrive a reason for them to go back into the dream world, aka it's just here to justify a sequel. But for as bare bones as this narrative is, I thought it was compelling. There's enough concrete information given to you about this world to have a rough grasp on some of the logic of it, but still a lot of unknowns about it. And those unknowns being what keeps the tension high and makes you hold your breath as you're exploring this world's dark, claustrophobic hallways. There are 2 sequels, so I hope that this world is fleshed out a bit more, because as it stands, I don't think what we currently know is enough to support 1 sequel, let alone 2. But it is enough to make this a solid, self-contained adventure. And you've been seeing this for a while now, but this game's presentation is spot on and one of the best things about it. It's a large part of why this game has such an oppressive atmosphere. As I said at the start of this segment, Script Welder has a very gritty, pixelated art style with a lot of visual noise placed all over the screen. The film grain placed over the screen making the picture look very hazy, like you're trying to pass what you're looking at through a dreamlike haze, or a nightmare-like haze, to be more accurate. Some of the screens in this game are haunting, too, like this shot of the staircase. Look at how the stairs are slowly swallowed up by that seemingly endless black abyss. Look at how striking these white eyes are when they're juxtaposed against the pitch blackness surrounding them. Listen again to that quiet desperation in the caller's voice, trying to get across that you need to wake up.
Wake up. You have to wake up.
All of this contributing to how eerie this game feels. And the music in the game isn't very memorable, but it is super appropriate. It's mainly ambient drones, and occasionally you may get a hint of a melody amongst the noise, but it's not there to be memorable or catchy. It's there to make the crushing atmosphere even more crushing. The dread that this presentation instills in the player, even before they've touched a button, is a testament to how effective presentation can be in setting the mood of a game. Even more impressive because this was made in fucking Flash! I have no negatives about this presentation. It is perfect for what this game is going for. In terms of gameplay, this is a point-and-click adventure game. Gameplay consists solely of moving your cursor around the screen with your mouse and clicking on things. If your cursor changes color, then you can interact with whatever your cursor is hovering over. It's generally a good idea in these kinds of games to interact with everything just for the sake of being thorough. You never know what's going to be mandatory and what's going to be optional. A bulk of the gameplay revolves around puzzles, which are all very well designed. All of the solutions are logical, but not blindingly obvious, which is the perfect sweet spot for a puzzle to be in. Take this puzzle, for example. You approach a furnace door and... That really got me the first time around. Especially since those handprints stay there and really let you sit in the uncomfortable fact that you just watched someone burn to death right in front of your eyes. You need to get into that furnace to continue, but the wheel is too hot to hold while the furnace is still raging. There's a lever that turns it off, or at least there used to be. There isn't anymore, but we can improvise. Come on, he's not going to need it anymore. Using this, we can turn the furnace off, but even with it off, the wheel is still too hot to touch. So I try using a piece of cloth to protect my hands, and while that is a good idea, it's not enough protection. Then, I remember another room that, at the time I entered it, didn't seem that important, but would be perfect in this scenario. So I rushed back to that room with the leaky pipe in it. I soaked the cloth in the puddle of water that the pipe had left, went back downstairs and was able to use the wet cloth to open the furnace. All of these steps are logical, if a bit grim in the case of using a dead person's arm as a lever. All of the puzzles are like this. There was never a time where I thought that a solution used cat hair mustache logic. Every solution made sense. If it took me a while to figure it out, it was because I was stupid, not because the game was being overly opaque. But there were a couple of action scenes in this game too, such as this chase scene that I briefly showed earlier. And the genius of this chase is that you need to crank this door shut while the thing on the other side slowly gets closer. And this requires some fine motor skills as the lever that closes the door moves little by little, and you're most likely panicking trying to get the door shut. You'll overshoot, you'll make mistakes, and this only compounds how terrified you already are. I knew this was going to happen when I was opening this door thinking, they're gonna make me do this under pressure, aren't they? This game has a nice balance of puzzles and action. There's a good ebb and flow to the intensity of the gameplay, so you don't burn out on puzzles or action. However, this game isn't perfect, and I'll go over my criticisms of it now. I already mentioned that the ending speech comes off as a contrivance for a sequel rather than a rational thinking human being, but that's not my only issue with this game. While I do think the dark, gritty graphics enhance more than they take away, it is worth noting that there were times where I straight up didn't see the solution to a problem I was facing because of how dark the graphics were. This didn't happen very often. I can count on one hand how many times it did happen, but it is worth noting. However, my main issue with the deep sleep is the perspective changes. See, for most of the game, you're viewing it from a first-person perspective. However, there are a few screens that switch to a third-person perspective, and when this does happen, you can't see yourself, so you don't know where you're coming from. Like this screen here. Tell me, where are you? The answer is, it depends on where you're coming from. This entrance leads to this room, and this entrance leads to this room. And you aren't going to know that until you test them. And in the case of this specific screen, where you enter from will dictate whether you're in third person or first person. Enter the staircase from the top, and the camera will be placed at the top of the stairs. Enter from the bottom of the stairs, and the camera will be placed still at the top of the stairs. That's not confusing at all. However, none of these criticisms are deal breakers. Deep Sleep, despite its little foibles, is still a good game. It's beautifully atmospheric, and the hostility of the world that's hinted at is intriguing. The plot is very simple, but that simplicity allows it to remain focused on maintaining tension. There's no fat on this game at all. I actually don't mind going back into the dream world despite the flimsy reasoning behind it, because I'm so intrigued by it. And it is quite the journey we go on when we do head back into the deeper sleep. I won't be talking much about the presentation or gameplay of the sequels, as they remain largely unchanged from the first game, and I liked the first game's presentation and gameplay, so if you don't hear me mention it much, then take that as a good sign. My discussion of the sequels is mostly going to involve story. I'll bring up other things if I feel it's warranted, but the main focus will be the narrative. So, with that disclaimer out of the way, let's jump into the deeper sleep. Right from the rip, we have a more in-depth story than last time. The game starts with our protagonist recapping the events from the first game, and them saying that they're going to investigate that mysterious dream further at a local library, which is where we start the game. We poke around until we find a note that says, "As long as you don't know you're dreaming, you're safe." And just like that, it's revealed we're not at the library, we're back in the dream world, and now that we know we're in the dream world, we know that we're in danger. Nice way to ratchet the horror up right off the bat. This game doesn't need to say anything else because we already know what the danger is due to that recap. And just like that, we have our goal of this game, which is the same as last time: escape the dream world. Now, not a lot of the narrative is portrayed through gameplay, it's mainly delivered through exposition, and there are two main sources for this exposition. One, as you've already seen, is through notes. As you may have put together from how it looks, this note is just one fragment of a much larger note. It's been torn up and scattered across the game. I didn't find all of the fragments, but I did find most of them. And don't worry, I will read out the full note before I end this section, but not right now. There's a more appropriate time to read it out later on. What I will go over now is the other main way that the narrative is delivered in this game. After doing a little bit of exploring, you'll come across this shadowy figure behind a sewer gate, who you can actually talk to. And whoever this is seems to recognize you. The first thing they say to you is, "You again? Why have you returned?" Turns out, this is the guy who left us that wake up message from the first game, and they have a lot to tell you. I spent a full 5 minutes talking to this guy about the dream world and who this mysterious them were. Our friend here can reveal a lot of interesting information about this place, such as learning that regular dreaming is like having a personal pocket, but lucid dreaming removes your mind from your body to the point where lucid dreamers share a reality with each other. And this place has its own rules and terminology. Lucid dreamers refer to each other as travelers. It's in this reality that this mysterious them become dangerous. No guesses for who them is referring to. The stranger doesn't go into detail about why they're dangerous, because just talking about them means that they can sense you, so it's in your best interest to ignore them so that you can stay invisible. When asked if they could wake up from the dream, our friend here says maybe they would rather stay here. They're evasive about their real world life, but you can clock that it probably wasn't a good life that they were leading, especially if they would rather stay here. As a matter of fact, the stranger says no one knows a consistent way of waking up. If it were that easy, then they wouldn't be a problem. But there are people who have spent years here trying to figure out how to wake up with no success. The stranger refuses to help you any further. Them helping you up to this point has put them in more danger, so you're on your own from here. They do have a few last pieces of advice for you, though. One of them is about a woman named Felicity, a fellow traveler who's been lost here for a long time, most likely years. This literal detachment from reality has driven her insane, and she remains locked in the attic of this place for the safety of all the other travelers. The other is that they are specifically targeting you because you killed one of them in the first game. They've most likely blocked off all of the exits at this depth, so the stranger says that we most likely will need to go deeper to find a way to get out. How we get deeper is left for us to figure out. This conversation is the most interesting part of the game for me. It answers a couple of questions from the first game. It tells us a little bit more about them. It sort of reveals who was helping us. And it gives us some rules about this reality. But there are still a lot of unknowns, and it raises new questions as well. Who's Felicity? Who's this guy? What is their real life like? How big is this place? And what kind of people or things inhabit it? We know why they are hunting us down, but why are they a danger to other travelers? In horror media, especially horror sequels, there is a danger that you'll explain too much about the threat, or that the threat is overexposed to a point where it becomes commonplace and isn't scary anymore. Deeper Sleep got around this issue with this conversation. It satiated our curiosity built in the first game, but keeps enough unknowns for us to still be uncertain and cautious about this place. But as for who they are, that is somewhat answered in the note. Again, I only found 11 of the 15 fragments in the playthrough that I did of this game, but using the power of Google image search, I found the full thing. Shut up! Shut up! You've done shit like this too. Admit it. I got the gist of them from what I found, but this full note has cleared up a couple of details, so I will read out the full note now. I first encountered this phenomenon in the early 80s, but it would seem they have existed since the dawn of the human race. Commonly known as the Night Folk, or Shadow People, they live in the realm of dreams, but desperately want to get to our realm by possessing vulnerable, unoccupied bodies. As long as you don't know you are dreaming, you are safe. They attack when they sense a mind detached from its body, which sometimes happens during comas, but much more often during out-of-body experiences and lucid dreaming. So this establishes a motivation for them, and it gives them a name. The Night Folk, or the Shadow People if you prefer. But even now, it's not known why they want to get to our world, just that they want to get there and how they get there. They still remain mysterious, despite these breadcrumbs of information that the game is drip-feeding us. I also think this note being torn up and scattered around the world ties back into that they can sense you if you talk about them lore. I imagine the person who wrote this knew that writing about the Night Folk would draw their attention, and so tore the note to pieces and scattered it across the world to confuse the Shadow People as to their whereabouts. As for who wrote the note, that's never said, although we do know someone who has a habit of leaving us messages. The rest of the game does contain little allusions to other characters. This poster of a clown called Bert may not seem like anything now, but it will be by the time we get to the next game. And in this room, with seemingly random bunk beds in it, one of them is marked Cody. I didn't bring this up in the first game, but there was a room in that game that had a message on the wall that said, "Little Cody is lost without his plushy tiger." This meant nothing in the first game, but it does here. If you take this plushy tiger that you find in this old toy room and leave it on Cody's bed, you will get an alternate ending to this game. And speaking of the ending, let's talk about that now. When you leave the building that you're in, you find a well that you need to go down. I guess when our mate here said to go deeper, he meant it quite literally. You use a length of rope to descend into the well, leading you to this bunker. While walking down a corridor, your torch suddenly turns off. A pair of familiar, piercing white eyes appear. Really? That's it? You build all of this intrigue with all of this atmospheric tension, all of this lore around the Night Folk and this dream world, and this is how you pay it off? This is my biggest issue with Deeper Sleep. It doesn't feel like a complete story. The first game in the series is a self-contained narrative. You're trapped in a dream. Get out of the dream, and then you get out of the dream. It's super basic, but there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. It left room open for a sequel, but it worked as a story just by itself. Deeper Sleep is dependent on its sequel to achieve a satisfying ending. It feels like Deeper Sleep is a fantastic first 2 acts and then never bothered to write the 3rd act. The sequel is the 3rd act. And this feels like such a cheap way to plug the sequel. The first game didn't need to do that in order to build intrigue for a sequel, and this game didn't need to do that either. It was great just as it was. I hate this ending, but it is made a little bit more palatable if you put that plushy tiger on Cody's bed. If you did that, you get an added screen to the ending, a newspaper article of a young boy waking up from a 3-month coma, his first words being, "My tiger found me." One last piece of lore, his tiger helped him wake up. Perhaps a consistent way of waking up is by finding a possession you have in real life in the dream world. It may act as a sort of anchor to the real world and stop your detached mind from drifting too far into the dreamlands. That's just my theory, and it's a good thing that this is here, because it means that this ending isn't as bad as it would have been if it was just that cliffhanger. But the ending is the only part of this story that I don't like. Otherwise, I think this story is a slam dunk. The scope's expanded, the mystery surrounding the Night Folk and the Dreamland deepens. It answers questions from the first game while raising new ones for this game. Most narrative aspects are improved on in the Deeper Sleep. I think this game is better than the first one overall, and my hopes are high heading into the 3rd game. But before we move on to that 3rd game, I'll go over some of the non-story stuff now. Don't worry, this won't take long. As I said, presentation is largely the same as it was in the first game. The main thing I wanted to draw attention to in this regard is the reuse of rooms from the first game. They're all recognizable as familiar rooms, but they've changed slightly. This room that only had 4 doors in the first game now has 5. The crank door no longer has a window here. You enter it through an underground tunnel. The pipe is no longer leaking. It may seem like an insignificant thing, but it builds off from what the first game did. And by changing these locales ever so slightly, it gives this place a more uncanny feeling, which only adds to the tension. I do think the atmosphere is more tense in this game than the first one. And once you enter the forest, this is where the atmosphere shines the brightest, which is ironic because you need a torch to see in this place. Not only do you have great visuals and music, but at random intervals you'll hear things. A footstep beyond your sight. Or someone whispering to you. Also, this animation on Felicity is so smooth. Smoother than anything else I've seen in this series so far. This game maintains the top-notch presentation that the first game had. Gameplay is also largely the same as the first. We get some good puzzles like the first one too, like this one where you need to use a 5-kilo weight to open this door. So before getting to this place, if you're thorough, you will have found a needle in the toy room and a piece of thread from this scarecrow. When you get here, you'll find a bag with a hole in it, so, logically, you use the needle and thread to sew the bag back together. You then need to gather various items to put into the bag to increase its weight. Those items being this bag of flour, this pile of rocks, and this pile of dirt. I was pissed that I couldn't use the books from the library at the start of the game. Like, come on, look at how many of them there are. You're telling me there isn't 5 kilos worth of books here? But this puzzle carries on the tradition of a problem that is logically solved, but the solution isn't thrown in your face. You also have one of these button puzzles where you need to activate all buttons, and pressing one button activates it and all of the buttons adjacent to it. This is probably a good puzzle, but I suck at these, so I just brute forced this one, randomly smashing buttons until I lucked into the answer. And you do get another tense chase when you enter the attic with Felicity. I love the detail of the elevator doors slowly closing when you exit it, making the place darker and darker with only a sliver of light left. And then when Felicity starts chasing you, you need to use the screwdriver you just picked up to open up a metal panel blocking the button to call the elevator. I imagine this was the way that the travelers locked Felicity up here in the first place. And also, you drop the screwdriver the first time you try to open the door, which is a nice touch. This little section used the gameplay and the atmosphere to create a stressful sequence, whilst also adding a little bit more lore to this world. This was a highlight of the game for me. And that's all I have to say about Deeper Sleep. So now, let's finally move into the deepest sleep. Deepest Sleep starts with a sleep paralysis section. Alright, look. I'm not gonna judge the whole thing just from this starting sequence, but if I'm being honest, incredibly weak start. You had 2 other games be so tense in their beginnings, and then you choose to start this game with a jump scare, and a pretty fucking lame jump scare at that. Perhaps the jump scares in the other games were just as bad, but I never died in them, so I couldn't say. And those were all death scenes, not the first thing you see when you start playing. It destroys all tension right from the outset that the rest of the game needs to make up for. And unfortunately, this is not the only issue I have with Deepest Sleep. Actually, I'm going to lay my cards out on the table right now. This is my least favorite game in the trilogy. I want to stress, I don't think it's a bad game, but it has more issues than the first 2 games did, so it was a disappointing game. But to go through the story briefly, we're still trying to get out of the dream through the ever-convoluted dream world that we know so well at this point, solving puzzles, reading notes, and avoiding monsters. Like one of the first notes you find, this one here from Bert, a lot like this note from the first game, this is a note addressed to Bert, from Bert himself. It outlines that he's following a traveler and mentions something called the bottom feeders. It also warns us not to go into the church as the darkness, quote, will suffocate you. So, are we Bert? Or are we the traveler that Bert went after? Or are we a party separate from all of this? It builds a nice mystery around this note. Especially with these bottom feeders. A couple of rooms over, you can find a book with a couple more details about these bottom feeders. They only exist on the bottommost layer of the dream and feed on everything here. Even the night folk are terrified of them. However, the bottom feeders are blind and they can only sense movement. And this is a tried and true way to establish something as a huge threat. Take something that you're already scared of, in this case, the night folk, and then say there's a bigger threat than that. The original Star Wars trilogy did this with the Emperor in Return of the Jedi. It's a technique that does pique interest, but we'll have to see if they pay that introduction off effectively. We do find Bert later on though, although not in the best condition. This is a haunting visual, especially with the stool we also find in this room. And just before we enter this room through the grate, we can see... Well, that's ominous. And we have to follow that shadow to progress. So we follow it. Oh, Jesus! Fuck! Say hello to the bottom feeder. And this encounter... It's a letdown. I'll go more into why in the gameplay section, but this encounter did not live up to that introduction found in those notes. After solving a few more puzzles, we come across this room with a mirror in it, and looking into the mirror we see... Okay, as cliche as the I was the bad guy the whole time twist is, I do think it works for this game. For one thing, it ties nicely into the ending of the last game, which this game seemed to have forgotten up until this point. And this game did hint at the fact that you were a shadow person. Of all the threats that are in this game, none of them were shadow people. It was either an enveloping darkness in the church, or it was the bottom feeders. And speaking of the bottom feeders, it's said in that book that even shadow people would fear these things, which is why the protagonist was scared of them. It was very nice foreshadowing that wasn't super in your face, but it all comes together once it happens. So while my knee-jerk reaction to this twist was something akin to this, upon reflection, I do think that this is a good twist. Could have done without that jump scare though. Deep sleep, you're not very good at them. I feel a more effective way to end this scene maybe would have been to fade to white, and then slowly fade back into gameplay. Give the player a minute for the reality of the fact that you are a shadow person really sink in. Those things that you've been running from this whole time got you at the end of the last game, and you didn't know it until right now. But instead, Script Welder opted for going BOOM! And abruptly moving on. Come on, man, let the player really squirm in that uncomfortable fact. That's more unnerving than this! Heading into the next room, we're faced with a door with a light shining through it. Heading through the door, we find a traveler who starts running from us the moment he sees you. And here, you have a choice. A shadow person has already taken your body, so you can't get out of this sleep. Unless you take the body of another traveler. You can choose to chase him down this eerily familiar corridor and take his body, finally freeing yourself from the dream, the thing you've been working towards for 3 games now. However, it will also free a shadow person, the things you've been running from and have caused the death of people in the real world. In doing this, you earn your freedom, but you also help those monsters achieve their goal. Or you can take the other option. Let him go. Let an innocent person escape the dream and keep the shadow people trapped here. But in doing so, you damn yourself to forever be trapped in the deepest sleep. Your curiosity to learn about lucid dreaming is forever going to be satiated. This ending saved what was otherwise a pretty so-so story. This game isn't as story-heavy as the second game. It's a lot more puzzle and action-focused. The little story that was here was intriguing. The stuff with Bert was interesting, although it didn't really have a payoff, unless you count this as a payoff. And the bottom feeder lore was also interesting, but I think the gameplay ended up undermining the effective build-up. That ending is everything, though. Even as you're chasing this guy down, the main character is constantly questioning whether this is the right thing to do, because he's seen how dangerous the night folk can be, and is wondering if it's worth freeing them. But if you want to get out, you'll get out. Consequences be damned. The presentation is another highlight of this game. This is the best the presentation has been, even if nothing substantial has changed. The changes that were made are small but noticeable. Like, look at the lighting in this hallway. This lighting feels a lot more 3D than the last 2 games did, which does help with immersion. The animation on these crushing spiked walls is also a lot smoother than a lot of the animations from the previous games. And there's a piano piece in this part of the game that I actually found to be quite nice to listen to. Also, look at some of these screens. This one of the entrance to the church is fucking imposing. You feel so small entering this behemoth of an archway, yawning blackness, the only thing that your pitiful eyes can perceive. Otherwise, it's still the same top-notch presentation that the first 2 games had. Here it's just been tweaked to be as good as it possibly can be. And now the gameplay. This is where I feel this game falls flat on its face. Okay, maybe not flat on its face, but it definitely stumbles. And look, the gameplay of the first 2 games wasn't exactly groundbreaking or engaging all the way through, but they did the best with what they had, focusing on logical puzzle solving and short, sweet action sequences that build the already tense atmosphere. You still have some of those in this game, but not all of them are effective. Some of them are, like, take this puzzle for example. You need to open this doorway. There's a cable that leads to this crank, but there's no handle to turn it. After finding the handle in the church, don't worry, I'll get to the church in a bit. and turning it, the door opens. Heading through this door, we find a grate that we can't open, and this diagram says that while the crank opens the door, it simultaneously closes the sewer grate. So we need to find a way to open the sewer grate but keep the door open as well. The solution? Grab this stool that Bert used to take a much deeper sleep than this dream can provide, prop it in the doorway and turn the crank. The stool will leave just enough room for you to crawl under and it will open the sewer grate. Good puzzle in the vein of the older games. And I'm ashamed to admit this, I did use a walkthrough to solve a puzzle in this game. Don't worry, this is the only time I did this for all 3 games. There's this demon statue that you need to insert 2 gems into in order to open the church. I found the first one easy enough, but couldn't for the life of me find the second one. Turns out I just needed to use this hammer on a vase that I found. The gem was inside the vase. I'm an idiot. But there are some gameplay sequences that I thought just weren't good. First among them being the sequence inside the dark church. After you enter this place, you need to unlock a series of doors by removing gems from these holes with the white outline and place them into these holes with the blue outline. There are more and more gems that you need to place as you go on. The first room you have has 1 gem in it, the second has 2, etc. Reaching the end of the church, you find the handle for that crank. And here is where a chase?
Richard, son!
Happens. You need to go back through the church before the darkness consumes you, like Bert's note said that it would. And the way that they convey that you're in danger is by your torchlight getting smaller. Thing is, I didn't notice that. And because there was no other signifiers that I was in danger, such as an elevation in music, I didn't feel like I was in any danger. I went back through these rooms at a pretty leisurely pace, and I got out just fine. I feel like if you're trying to induce panic in the player, you need to make it a little bit more obvious that they're in danger, because I legit didn't know I was in any danger until I looked it up online. Didn't really live up to that suffocating darkness note from earlier. I have no idea what you were on about, Bert. And another action scene that wasn't really that great was the first encounter with the bottom feeder. As said in that book, they can't see, they can only sense movement. What this means is you need to be very careful with your mouse movements and not go too fast. You can keep track of the monster's wariness using this bar at the top of the screen. Here you need to flip this switch and then make your way to a door on the opposite side of the room before the door closes. But I didn't find this section scary either. I get the thinking behind it. As opposed to the other action scenes we've had up until this point, we aren't running away from something. Here, you're forced to get close to the danger and carefully pick your way around it in order to progress. You're actively putting yourself in danger in order to move forward. That's a great idea on paper. In practice, however, it leaves something to be desired. Being able to take my time and assess the situation, knowing I was in no danger whatsoever as long as I worked slowly, meant there was no urgency to the situation. There was no tension because this bar was telling me how much danger I was in. I can think of a way where this might have been better. If there was a shadow person chasing you, that might have helped. That way you would have had to strike a balance between working slowly enough so the bottom feeder doesn't sense you, but fast enough so that the shadow person doesn't catch you. Considering the ending that we got, I understand why they didn't do it, but if we're judging this encounter just as it was, it felt quite underwhelming. I think it says a lot when I was more scared of these monsters that never touched me than I was of the monster that actually managed to kill me. Then you get this sequence, reminiscent of the end of the first game's chase, but it's done worse here. In the first game, you had to close this door under time pressure, and you needed to have a basic level of finesse to close that door. There were multiple things you had to do successfully in order to escape that night folk. Here, it's just a button mash. I guess the thinking was that the shock of this thing bursting through the wall would be enough to scare me, but I had things bursting out at me all the time in this game. I'd grown numb to it by this point, especially considering how short the game is. And there are some things which just didn't make sense to me. The one that immediately comes to mind is this, whatever it is in this room. A piece of paper, maybe? I don't know. No, but you know what the significance of it is? So would I, because I have no clue what purpose this serves. I went through the whole game without finding out what this thing means to the overall plot, and being blunt with you, I still have no idea what its purpose is. Look, I think the Deepest Sleep is still a good game. The ending especially is great, but the journey getting there was a bit bumpy. Some of it was good and some of it wasn't. I think it is a good enough end to the trilogy that far exceeded my expectations going in. But with how well this trilogy did overall, good enough was underwhelming. I was expecting more from The Deepest Sleep than good enough. All of that being said, I liked going through this whole trilogy. Even if none of the games here were flawless, they provided me a world and an atmosphere that I thought couldn't be achieved on a platform that was as limited as Flash was. The first game, for as basic as it is, provided a dread-filled journey through a hostile world, leaving enough room open for a sequel which Deeper Sleep filled nicely, adding more lore, more tension, more characters, basically adding more of everything, but still managed to restrain itself enough to keep things uncertain and unknown. And even if the third game did stumble a little through its runtime, the ending closes the series out very nicely. I mean, I say it closes out. There was a fourth game released on Steam a decade after the third game, so this series didn't end here, but that's another story for another day. This video just covers the Flash games, and they're good games. I recommend them.